My name is Renee Castellanos, and I am 34 years old. 6 weeks ago, I called my father to tell him I had been promoted to Senior Financial Crimes Analyst at the Treasury Department. I had been working toward this for 9 years. I expected maybe 10 seconds of pride. He laughed before I finished the sentence. "Government job," he said. "Still pushing paper for people who actually make money. Your brother just closed on a $4 million property in Scottsdale. That's a promotion, Renee." I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time after that call. 3 weeks later, 2 federal agents knocked on my brother's door at 6 in the morning. The case file had my badge number on it. I hadn't requested it. I hadn't even known his name was in the system until the night before, when a flag I'd set up 2 years earlier, for an entirely different case, finally cleared. My father still doesn't know it was me. He doesn't know it was ever going to be anyone. Before I take you back to where this started, if you're new here, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. I read every one of them. Now let me take you back 9 years, to the year I chose the job my father would spend the rest of his life calling pathetic. I grew up in Tempe, Arizona, in a house where my father's voice set the temperature of every room. Hector Castellanos owned a mid-sized commercial real estate firm. He wore his success the way some men wear cologne, applied heavily, noticed by everyone, and impossible to ignore once you'd been in the room with it. My older brother Mateo was built in his image. Same laugh, same handshake, same instinct for filling a room. By the time Mateo was 26, he was running half of Dad's deals and closing the other half on his own. Dad called him a natural. He said it the way other fathers say, valedictorian. I was the quiet one. I liked numbers. I liked the way they didn't lie to you, didn't perform for you, didn't need you to laugh at the right moment. In high school, I did our church's books for the Sunday collection because the elderly treasurer's eyesight was going and nobody else wanted to do it. I was 16 and I found a $400 discrepancy that had been sitting there for 11 months. Nobody had stolen it. It was just a transposition error, 2 digits flipped in a ledger. But I remember the feeling of finding it, like turning on a light in a room that had been dark so long, everyone forgot it had a switch. I told my father about it at dinner. He nodded, distracted, and asked Mateo how the Phoenix warehouse deal was going. I majored in accounting at Arizona State. Dad paid for it without complaint. He believed in education the way he believed in good suits, as something that made you presentable. But every time I mentioned what I actually wanted to do with the degree, his eyes would drift toward whatever Mateo was doing instead. Forensic accounting, I told him senior year. I want to investigate financial crime, maybe work for Treasury or the SEC. So you want to be an accountant who never gets to keep any of the money, he said. He wasn't being cruel exactly. He genuinely could not understand why anyone would choose a smaller number over a bigger one. To my father, the size of the number was the entire point of being alive. I took the federal exam 2 months after graduation. I scored high enough that 3 different agencies reached out before I'd even finished my master's. I chose Treasury's Financial Crimes Division because it was the hardest path, and because something in me, some old 16-year-old instinct from a church ledger, wanted to be the person who turned the light on. My mother, Carmen, was proud in the quiet way she was proud of everything that didn't fit inside my father's frame. She kept the letter from Treasury confirming my position taped inside her recipe box, where my father never looked. Mateo, for his part, was never cruel to me directly. He was just absent in the specific way successful older siblings can be absent. He'd call on my birthday from an airport. He'd send a generic text on holidays with the wrong emoji. At family gatherings, he'd ask, "How's the government thing going?" with the exact same inflection you'd use to ask about someone's chronic but non-serious medical condition. I started at Treasury at 25. The work was slow and meticulous and almost nothing like television. Most days I was reading wire transfer logs, cross-referencing shell company filings, looking for the small inconsistencies that told a bigger story. It was exactly the kind of work my father considered invisible. For the first 4 years, nothing about my job intersected with my family in any way. I worked cases in Nevada, in Florida, in upstate New York. I got promoted twice, quietly, the way government promotions happen, with a new title and a slightly larger badge of access and absolutely no parade. Each time, I told my father. Each time, he found a way to make it smaller than whatever Mateo was doing that month. Assistant analyst, he repeated the first time, like he was trying out a foreign word. What's that pay, 40 grand? It paid 68. I didn't correct him. Correcting my father about money had never once in my life changed his opinion of the number. It only changed his opinion of me for bringing it up. 5 years in, I was assigned to a regional task force focused on commercial real estate financing fraud across the Southwest. Specifically, we were looking at a pattern: small and mid-sized firms using inflated property appraisals to secure loans far larger than the properties justified, then using the excess capital to fund unrelated ventures, sometimes legitimate, sometimes not. The pattern was not unusual. What was unusual on a Tuesday in October was a company name that came across my screen during a routine cross-reference: Castellanos Commercial Group. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I did what any analyst would do. I checked whether it was a coincidence. Castellanos isn't an uncommon name. There are dozens of commercial real estate firms with similar names across Arizona alone. It was not a coincidence. The registered agent was my father. I want to be very clear about something here, because I think it's the part people find hardest to believe. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindicated. I felt sick. My hands were cold for almost an hour. I sat at my desk rereading the same line of the filing over and over, hoping it would resolve into a different name the way an optical illusion resolves when you look at it long enough. It didn't. I want to ask you something, because I think more people have been in some version of this moment than ever talk about it. Have you ever discovered something about someone you love that you knew, the second you saw it, you could never unknow? Tell me in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time, because this is where the story actually starts. Here is what federal employees are required to do in this situation, and I want to walk you through it carefully because it matters for everything that happens later. The moment I recognized a conflict of interest, a family member's company appearing in a case I had access to, I was obligated to report it. Not quietly, not, I'll just keep an eye on it and step away if it gets serious. Immediately, in writing, to my supervisor, with full disclosure of the relationship. I did exactly that. Within 2 hours of finding the filing, I had submitted a conflict of interest disclosure naming my father's company, my relationship to him, and requesting formal recusal from any matter involving Castellanos Commercial Group. My supervisor, a careful, soft-spoken woman named Diane Whitfield, who had been doing this work for 26 years, called me into her office that afternoon. "This is the right call," she said, looking at my disclosure form. "And I want you to understand something. Recusal doesn't mean this goes away. It means you don't touch it. Someone else will. If there's something here, it gets investigated regardless of whose name is on the building." I told her I understood. "I need you to actually understand it," she said more gently. "Because in my experience, the hardest part of this job isn't finding the fraud. It's living the rest of your life next to people who don't know you found it." I didn't fully understand what she meant. Not yet. I was formally walled off from anything involving Castellanos Commercial Group that same day. My access was restricted. The case, if it became a case, would be assigned to another analyst in another regional office, and I would never see it again unless called as a witness regarding the conflict itself. For 2 years, I heard nothing. I want to be honest about those 2 years because they were strange. I went home for Thanksgiving. I went home for Mateo's engagement party, where my father gave a toast about how Mateo had the Castellanos instinct, and someday would take the company to a whole different level. I sat there with a glass of sparkling cider, I don't drink much, and smiled at the appropriate moments, while a small, cold part of my brain that I couldn't turn off kept doing the math. A whole different level. Funded by what, exactly? I didn't know if anything was actually wrong. That's important. A name showing up in a database isn't proof of anything. Companies get flagged for all kinds of reasons: sloppy paperwork, an overzealous appraiser, a clerical error multiplied across filings. For all I knew, my recusal had triggered a review that found absolutely nothing, and the file had been closed and forgotten months ago. I genuinely hoped that was true. I want that on the record. I did not spend 2 years hoping my family would be investigated. I spent 2 years trying very hard not to think about it at all, which is its own kind of constant thinking. My father, meanwhile, continued to be my father. At Christmas that second year, I mentioned that I'd been selected for an interagency training program, a 6-month rotation working alongside FBI financial crimes units on complex fraud cases. It was competitive. Less than 5% of applicants in my division were selected. I had studied for the entrance assessment for 3 months. FBI, my father repeated the way he'd repeated assistant analyst years earlier. Then he turned to Mateo. Tell them about the Camelback project. Tell your sister what a real deal looks like. Mateo, to his credit, looked a little uncomfortable. He'd had 2 beers, and his guard was down enough that I caught something in his face I rarely saw, something closer to apology. But he told the story anyway. $11 million, a property in North Phoenix, refinanced twice in 18 months. I smiled and said that sounded like a lot of moving parts to track. Mateo laughed. That's why I have people for that. I finished the FBI rotation. I came back with a new title, Senior Financial Crimes Analyst, and a level of system access I hadn't had before. Wider, cross-divisional. The kind of access where flags you'd set years earlier on cases you no longer remembered could resurface if certain conditions were met. I didn't think about that capability in relation to my father. I want to be honest. By that point, almost 3 years after my recusal, I had genuinely let it go. I assumed nothing had come of it. I assumed I would never know either way, and that this was simply what it meant to work in a system larger than your own family. Most of the time, you don't get to know how the story ends. 6 weeks ago, I called my father to tell him about the promotion. I debated whether to call it all. Some part of me, the part that had absorbed 34 years of his particular weather pattern, already knew how it would go. But my mother had asked, gently, the way she always asked things. He'd want to know, Renee, even if he doesn't say it right. So I called. I told him about the promotion. Senior Financial Crimes Analyst, federal pay scale increase, expanded authority across 3 regional divisions. He laughed before I finished the sentence. Government job, he said, still pushing paper for people who actually make money. Your brother just closed on a $4 million property in Scottsdale. That's a promotion, Renee. I sat in my car in the parking garage of the federal building for a long time after that call. Long enough that the automatic lights in the garage clicked off, and I had to wave my hand to turn them back on. I want to tell you what I felt because I think it's more useful than pretending I felt nothing. I felt 34 years old and 16 years old at the exact same time. I felt the $400 discrepancy in the church ledger and the light I'd turned on that nobody else had noticed. I felt every government thing and every distracted nod across every dinner table since I was 18 years old. And underneath all of that, quietly, almost embarrassingly, I felt something else. I felt the new access badge in my bag, the one from the promotion, the one that, for the first time in my career, let me see across divisions, including the regional office that had handled my father's case 3 years earlier, if it still existed at all. I want to be very careful here because this is the part of the story where it would be easy to make myself sound like someone with a plan. I didn't have a plan. I had a badge and a bad phone call and an old habit of checking things I probably didn't need to check. That night, I logged into the system from home, not to look for anything specific. I told myself I was just testing my new access parameters, the way you'd test a new key in a lock just to feel it turn. I searched Castellanos' commercial group. The case was still open. Not just open, active. Far more active than I expected. What had started 3 years earlier as a routine appraisal inflation review had grown, the way these things sometimes do, into something much larger. 2 additional firms had been identified as using a similar structure: inflated appraisals, rapid refinancing, capital diverted into a web of LLCs that didn't appear to do much of anything except receive money and then send slightly less of it somewhere else. One of those LLCs had Mateo's name on the formation documents. I sat at my kitchen table and read through what I had access to, which, even with my new clearance, was limited. I wasn't on the case. I couldn't be on the case. But I could see enough to understand the shape of it. Federal investigators, actual agents, not analysts like me, had been quietly building this for months. Subpoenas for banking records, interviews with appraisers, a timeline that, if it held together, suggested the inflated valuations weren't a one-time mistake, but a method, refined and repeated across at least 6 properties over 4 years. The Camelback project was on the list. I closed my laptop. I sat in my kitchen in the dark for a long time. Here's what I want to ask you, because I think it matters more than the rest of this story. If you found out that something you'd reported years ago, something you did because it was the right thing to do, not because you wanted anything from it, had quietly grown into something enormous and was now going to land on someone you loved, What would you do with that information? You can't unsee it, you can't unknow it, and you absolutely cannot do anything about it, because doing anything about it is the one thing you're legally and ethically forbidden from doing. I want you to really think about that, because I had to sit with it for 6 weeks. I told no one. Not my mother, not Mateo, obviously. I went to work, I did my job, my actual job, the one with my actual cases, none of which had anything to do with my family. I requested, formally in writing, an update to my standing recusal to ensure the wall around me regarding Castellanos Commercial Group remained airtight even with my expanded access. Diane Whitfield, now a regional director, approved it within the hour and added a note I didn't ask for. Appreciate you flagging this proactively, noted for the file. I went to my parents' house for Sunday dinner twice during those 6 weeks. Both times, my father found a way to mention Mateo's success and my paper pushing in the same conversation, sometimes in the same sentence. Both times, I smiled and changed the subject and helped my mother with the dishes and said nothing. I'm not going to pretend that was easy. Sitting across from my father, eating his food, listening to him build Mateo up using the exact language of accomplishment that Mateo's own LLCs were currently being subpoenaed over, that took something out of me every single time. Not anger exactly, something closer to grief. Grief for a version of this family that had never actually existed, that I'd spent 34 years quietly hoping might still show up if I just kept being patient and competent and quiet. It didn't show up. It was never going to show up. The case made that clear in a way that 34 years of dinner table comments never quite had. 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday, 2 agents from the regional task force executed a search warrant at Mateo's home and office at 6 in the morning. I found out the way most of the family found out, through a panicked phone call from my mother at 7:40 a.m., her voice shaking, asking if I knew anything, if I could do something, if this was some kind of mistake. I told her I didn't know anything. That part was true. I knew the case existed. I knew its general shape. I did not know the warrant had been issued, did not know the date, did not know any operational detail, because I was walled off, completely, exactly as I was supposed to be. The system worked exactly as designed. The case had grown for 3 years on its own momentum, built by agents who had never met me, based on a flag I'd filed and then never touched again. My father called an hour later. I almost didn't answer. Renee. His voice was different than I'd ever heard it, smaller. You work for these people, the Treasury people. Can you find out what this is? Can you make a call? Dad, I can't do that, I said. Even if I wanted to. I'm not on this case. I've never been on this case. There's nothing I can do, and there's nothing I'm allowed to do. Your brother didn't do anything wrong, he said. Whatever this is, it's a misunderstanding. You know how these appraisals work, you know it's not exact. Dad, I said quietly, I really can't talk about this with you, I'm sorry. He hung up. Over the following days, the shape of things became public the way these things become public. Slowly, then all at once. A local business journal ran a piece about a federal investigation into a pattern of inflated commercial appraisals across the Phoenix metro area, naming several firms, including Castellanos Commercial Group. The story didn't accuse anyone of anything yet. It used careful words. Under review. Part of a broader inquiry. But everyone in my father's professional world reads those words fluently, and within a week, 2 of his longtime business partners had quietly distanced themselves from a deal that had been weeks from closing. My mother called me almost daily. Not for information. She'd stopped asking for that after the first call, but because she needed somewhere to put the fear. I let her. I drove to Tempe most evenings after work and sat with her in the kitchen while she made too much food for 2 people, the way she always did when she needed her hands busy. My father and I did not speak again for almost 2 weeks. When he finally called, it wasn't to apologize. I want to be honest about that because I think people watching this might expect a cleaner ending than the one I actually got. He called because Mateo's attorney had told him that one of the original flags in the case file, the very first one from 3 years earlier, had come from an internal Treasury referral, filed by an employee who had then recused themselves due to a family relationship. He didn't know it was me. He had no way to know that. The referral was anonymized in the documents his attorney had seen. All it showed was a department and a date. But my father, sitting with that piece of paper, did the math the way he does math about everything. Fast, instinctive, looking for the angle. Someone in your department started this, he said, 3 years ago. Around the time you would have started that fancy program of yours. Dad, I don't know what you're looking at, and I genuinely can't discuss case details with you. I never could. I'm not asking you to discuss it, he said. I'm asking if it was you. There was a long silence. I want you to understand that in that silence, I genuinely considered telling him. Not because I thought it would fix anything, because I was tired, and because for 34 years I had wanted my father to see me clearly, just once. And here, finally, was a moment where he was looking directly at me and asking a real question. But here is the truth I landed on, sitting in my car in that same parking garage, 3 years and 6 weeks after I'd first found that filing. Telling him wouldn't have been honesty. It would have been a gift. A confession dressed up as honesty, designed to give him something to be angry at that wasn't the truth. Which is that his son built something on a foundation that couldn't hold, over 4 years across 6 properties, while my father called it the Castellanos instinct at every party. Dad, I said finally, I reported a conflict of interest the moment I found one, exactly the way I'm required to. That's the job. That's the whole job. I don't get to decide what happens after that, and neither do you, and neither does Mateo's attorney. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, That's not an answer. I know, I said. It's the only one I have. He hung up again. We have not spoken since. I want to tell you what happened with Mateo because I think it matters more than what happened with my father. Mateo called me 11 days after the search warrant. Not angry. Tired, in a way I'd never heard from him before. The particular tiredness of someone who has spent their whole life moving fast enough that they never had to look down, and has just been forced to look down. I think I screwed up pretty bad, Ren, he said. No nickname for me in years, and suddenly there it was. I asked him if he had a lawyer. He did. A good one. His attorney had told him to stop talking to almost everyone, and he was technically not supposed to be talking to me either, but he said he didn't care anymore. Dad keeps telling everyone this is a misunderstanding, he said. I think he actually believes it. I don't think he's ever once looked closely enough at what I do to know whether it's a misunderstanding or not. He just believes it because I'm the one who did it. I didn't say anything for a while. I used to think that was the best thing about working for him, Mateo said, that he never checked, that he just trusted the number I gave him and moved on to the next deal. He laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. Took me a long time to figure out that wasn't trust. He just didn't want to know. I asked him if he was scared. Yeah, he said. I'm scared. I'm also... He stopped. I don't know how to say this without it sounding insane. I'm also relieved? Is that insane? I told him it wasn't insane. I told him about my 16-year-old self and the church ledger, the $400, the feeling of a light turning on in a room that had been dark so long everyone had forgotten it had a switch. I told him that the worst part of carrying something wrong is almost never the thing itself. It's the light switch nobody will let you reach. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I don't know if I can fix this. You probably can't fix all of it, I said, but you can stop adding to it. That's not nothing. That's actually most of what people mean when they say, fix. I don't know what happens to Mateo's case. I genuinely don't. I'm walled off, and I'll likely never know the resolution unless it becomes public the way the initial story did. He's cooperating with his attorney's guidance, which, from what I understand, means he's no longer fighting the subpoenas, no longer pretending the LLCs were anything other than what the bank records show them to be. Whether that results in a settlement, charges, or something else entirely isn't something I get to know. And for the first time in this whole story, I'm genuinely at peace with not knowing. My mother and I talk every day now. My father and I do not talk. I don't know if we will again, not in any way that would feel like talking rather than performing. I think some part of him needs someone to blame who isn't his favorite son, and for now, the shape of that blame is pointed at a department, an anonymous referral, a 3-year-old date that happens to line up with my career. He's not wrong about the date. He's wrong about almost everything else. I think about that phone call sometimes. Government job, still pushing paper for people who actually make money. I think about how, 6 weeks after he said that, the paper I push, quietly, for 9 years in rooms he's never been in and will never understand, turned out to be the only honest accounting that had been done of his son's business in 4 years. I don't feel like I won anything. I want to be really clear about that because I think it would be easy to tell this story as some kind of victory, and it isn't one. Nobody in my family is better off than they were 2 months ago. My mother is exhausted. My brother is facing consequences that will likely follow him for years. My father has lost something, not just money, not just a deal, that I don't think he has language for yet, and may never find. What I have that I didn't have before is something smaller and stranger than victory. I have the knowledge that the version of myself my father has spent 34 years calling small, the careful one, the quiet one, the one who pushes paper, was, this whole time, doing the one job in this family that was actually about the truth. He called it pathetic. It just took the truth a little while to introduce itself. If you've ever done the right thing quietly, the kind of right thing nobody claps for, and watched it matter anyway, years later, in a way you never got to take credit for, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who's ever been told that what they do for a living is small. Sometimes small is just another word for foundational. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones holding everything up. Subscribe if you haven't yet. I'll see you in the next one.